everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Book Dragon Book Tour interview. I'm joined today by the star of this week's book tour, Edna Hunneysett. Thank you for joining us, Edna.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
I'm sure our viewers would love to hear more about your background. Would you be able to tell us a bit about your journey into becoming a writer?
It's many, many years ago now, and my father had farmed on the farm on the Yorkshire Moors for many years. We were brought up there, and he retired about 61 because he had arthritis. So his mum and dad bought a caravan and put it in the stackyard because he wouldn't leave the farm. And a brother took it over. And then he got cancer. And as he deteriorated, he wouldn't leave the caravan, and the family were all taking turns visiting, especially my brother and sister in the valley. And on the Friday morning, my sister rang me and said, please, could I cover? It was over 20 miles away for us because she had to get home and do some washing. She had a number of children, and my brother couldn't make it. He was coming on the Saturday from Whitby. So I had to wait till my 16-year-old came home from doing her GCSEs to mind our 2-year-old. We have a big family. And I was 8.5 months pregnant. And I drove over the moors and sat with him. And he died that day while I was there, which is quite a privilege. But 2 or 3 years later, this little girl, Elizabeth, was very frustrated when she found out her 7 older siblings had all seen Grandad and she'd never seen him. And so I thought, I'll write about him and then she will know more about my dad. And that's how I started writing. And it was quite an emotional book, and it was very factual, and it was about all the struggles we had in the 1940s and farming then. We had no bathroom, we had no inside toilet, it was a bucket in a building. And we had no running hot water, just a cold water tap from the spring, from the field. And, you know, mice you could hear in the skirting boards, and we saw them at night running out. And, you know, it was very, very isolated. And we were brought up with that, but we were used to it. We learned to milk cows and everything. So my daughter got a good impression. I thought she would get a good impression of how my dad lived and my mum and the family. However, I tried to get it published, and I'd written it by longhand. I couldn't type, and a colleague, I worked part-time at a local radio station, a colleague typed it up for me, and I had to send chapters off to publishers, not like today. And every time they came back with nice letters, but not quite what they wanted. And after a number of attempts, I gave up. When that little girl became 19, she was recovering from a serious illness. And she had a look at my book and she read it. So then she knew about my dad, but she said, you know, Mum, let's alter it, let's revamp it. You've got too many characters in, let's take some out. So we changed it, we changed the title, we brought in a mystery man. So my mum and dad weren't really my mum and dad anymore, but the farming history is still there, very much there, and what went on in the 40s. And again, this time I'd learned to use a computer by now, and I sent it off time after time to publishers, and it still got rejected. You jump 20 more years, and I was then 77 when I finally dug it out again, changed some bits again, changed the title, and changed the ending because I wasn't happy with it. And I finally got it published 36 years after I wrote the original. So that's how I got into writing books.
An incredible story, Edna. And I hope you don't mind me mentioning that you are the oldest member of our Book Dragon family of authors. Do you have any words of wisdom to share with people who may feel they've left it too late in life to follow their dreams?
Oh, yes, I think everyone should follow their dreams. You might laugh at this. My first dream was to have a doll's pram when I was very young, and the parents couldn't afford one. And so I used to imagine heaven was a great big cave, and I used to walk round and round it with my dolly in a doll's pram. That was my first dream. I never got a doll's pram.
Oh,
I know, but I left school and got married at 20 and had our big family. And when I got to 50, I thought, I want to do a degree. I had no A levels, I had O levels. And I applied to do a distance learning one because I couldn't leave. The youngest was about 12 then. I didn't want to leave the family. So I had to do a couple of weekends and summer school. And I'd always thought of people with degrees as professional people, and they were different, and we were just ordinary. And now I was traveling all the way to Birmingham for a summer school a weekend in King's Standing, traveling on the bus by myself to Birmingham, very proud of myself because I was going there on my own. And I stuck it out and I got my degree. And that to me was, and then I realized people with degrees aren't any different to anyone else. We're all the same, we just studied. But I felt it was a great achievement at 55 to do that and get a BA. Later on in life, we moved over the moors to where my family are for 5 years, and I introduced Ray, my husband, to playing whist, the card game, because the villages used to hold whist drives. And for 5 years, we lived there, and he loved it. He learned to play whist. We went around different villages with my brother and sometimes my sister, and it was lovely. But just before COVID, we came back to Middlesbrough. I wanted to come back. We had another grandchild. I was traveling backwards and forwards to help. And I was missing my family. A lot of my 4 daughters, they all live locally, and one of my sons. So we came back, and he said, but I miss my social life. So at 81, I decided I would try and set up a whist in Middlesbrough. And at first we might have had 6 of us. It was terrible. And we struggled to get 8. Last Friday, I ran it. It's in Linthorpe Village Centre. There were 22 people. And
Wow.
the other 4 that couldn't make it, but they'll make another Friday, but there might be another couple off, on sick or holiday. It's just amazing. And more than half of these people live on their own. And they love it. And we have a cup of tea and a break in the middle. And so that is, to have a dream like that, but it worked. And I'm still astounded sometimes that they keep coming, and new ones walk in. And we have practices on Tuesdays and Wednesdays for beginners and for those who want to brush up the skills. And so that's been a big thing in our life in our 80s. And I think the latest one was when Kirsty, our lovely Kirsty, who has the shop, and she opened it up in the July, I think, of 22.
Yeah, that's right.
And in the August, I telephoned her and I joined. And she's been wonderful, as you all have the team to help us. I've never had this kind of support with my books before, but she wanted a massive dragon, and I mean a big one that would sit in the corner and be a mascot for the shop. And did we know anybody? But my daughter knits dragons. So my daughter and I, our eldest daughter, Kat, and I decided we'd have a go. And we made this massive dragon for Kirsty. And obviously she paid us for making it. And then she wanted smaller ones. So we shrunk the pattern right down. And I said, well, I'll have a go. So at age 83, I had a new hobby. So you follow your dreams, It's amazing. I always think life is for living. You can't change the past, you can learn from it. You can't do a lot about the future, you can plan, but today I won't get again. Life's not a rerun, it's not a dress rehearsal. We're meant to live it and live it to the full. So live your dreams, change course, take another path, but do it.
That's so very true, Edna. That is so inspiring to listen to. And obviously, with Greener Beyond the Hill, it's your first in a fictional series, but as you said, it's based on your own life experiences. So, can you set the scene for the book and what's happening at the start of it?
Right at the start, my mother, she's Mary in the book, and obviously we have changed things a bit, but basically it's semi-autobiographical. My mum and dad lived down near Stratford-on-Avon. They went down there in the late 30s for work for my dad. He was a farm labourer. He didn't have to join up during the war, but he always wanted to come back up north and rent his own little farm. And so he was always on the lookout. And eventually we came up in 1942. I was 2 years old. My sister was 3 and my brother was 4, and my mother was pregnant. And she was a town girl, and she lived in a little cottage, in a row of cottages near Stratford-on-Avon, where we were born. And she was imagining a farmhouse with a lovely big working kitchen and cupboards, and she'd never envisaged what it would be like. So she's lying in bed, and we came up. We wouldn't believe this. We travelled up. I don't remember this. I was told this, obviously. And this is what she's remembering. When my dad got the phone, not a phone call, there weren't any phones, a letter from his cousin to say this farm had come up to let over the moors a few miles from where he was brought up. And he decided he would take it. He contacted the agent and they said, yes, he could have it. And so she had sold lots of the nice bits of furniture because he needed money for a cow and a horse. He could borrow implements. And they travelled up in this lorry that brought up the bits of furniture. But his old boss gave him a pig in a crate and it was put in the back with the furniture. This is how, and she's thinking through all this. Because when they got up there, the elderly couple who were retiring from the farmhouse hadn't moved out. So we all had to go in one bedroom. There only were two, and the old elderly couple in the other one. And my dad went over to the valley to work on his cousin's farm in the book. And she's left on her own, my mum, for a few days, coping and wondering how she's going to get any clothes washed. And it was a little, you lit a little fire under a copper thing in the back kitchen where she could wash clothes. And that's how the book opens, because although we've come and it's the day of the farm sale and the couple are finally going, and she knows she'll have her husband back, maybe in and out all day, and the house will be hers. So that's the setting of the book. And she reminisces about how she met my dad, and it was in a pub and she was serving behind a bar, and he saw her, he thought, yes. And they met up and they got married. And she's remembering all of this. And then that's how the book starts. So she'd finally be there, but it isn't what she expected, because she has to get up and light the fire every morning. And the mice have been running around and she hates them. And she wants another cat because the cat that was left behind won't catch the mice. It's too lazy and old. And I could talk a lot more about it, but I don't know how long I have.
As long as you want, really. I mean, you've gone on to write a further 3 books in the series. And what year have you now reached up to in the story? And will there be more books to come after that?
The rest of the greener books, yes. That one goes until 1951 when I'm 11. And I passed my 11 plus. Well, you can imagine now a farmhouse kitchen. The farmhouse kitchen, you baked on it, you ate on it, you washed pots on it because there was no washing up facilities. You had a bowl and a tray. Everything was done in the farmhouse kitchen. It wasn't very big. And by now there were 6 of us. So North Riding County Council offered different grammar schools, and one of them was a boarding school at Scarborough. And my parents thought that would be a good education for me. Would I like to go? And I thought, I read a book once. It sounded very exciting. I said yes. So it wasn't quite as exciting as I expected. So the second book covers my 5 years of my boarding school life. And it was like living in 2 worlds, because when I got to boarding school, I found out you could go to the toilet and pull a chain and it flushed. It was all new. I could switch a light on the wall and lights came on. It was another world. And I could sit in a bath and there were taps and you got hot water out of them. So it was a totally different lifestyle. I got teased terribly with my very broad Yorkshire accent. The day girls wondered what I did on the farm. And I said, well, we help in the house and we do up. What's doing up? Well, you have to clean all the muck and straw out of the cow shed and then put clean stuff in for the cows. Well, you should have seen 1 or 2 faces. Where I was coming from. And the very first morning I had this, my mother's, a lady in another village had given her a dress for me and a coat that her daughter had outgrown. She was a teacher, this lady. She was very nice. She came to visit my mother in the summer. And the coat had a patch on its pocket. She said, well, that's where the mouse got in to nibble the biscuits, but it's quite tiny. And I went in that coat, and it was the only coat I ever had, because my parents couldn't afford another one. They did get me a bit, actually. And I did get a coat that they bought, wasn't quite uniform. And she gave me this dress. Well, the colour was a very crisp brown. And the next morning, you get up in silence. I was in a dormitory of 11, and silent corridors and silence downstairs and queuing for the refectory, and then you all wait patiently round the table. And this nun called me out because my dress was of pale mustard compared with the bright brown of the new borders. She said, you can't. Took me upstairs, and I had a wardrobe full of new uniforms. She gave me a new one. And then all I thought was, who's going to pay for it? Because I know my parents couldn't. They were very kind. They'd done it helped, and the rewarder the same. So the book is a contrast of living at home and living at school. And as my accent improved in my speech, I got teased at home. So I didn't feel in the end, I didn't really belong anywhere. But I come out all right at the end. So that was the second book. Sorry, I wouldn't say too much. The third one, when I leave school, I'd made a very good friend the first term. She lived at Malton. She was a single parent. Well, her mum was a single parent practically. She didn't really see her dad much, and she had an older sister. And after a term in the second year, her mum died. And it was terrible for her. And I was very concerned about inviting her to our house because I didn't know how she'd make out with such no mod cons or anything. And I invited her, and she absolutely loved it. She loved our family. We're a big, noisy, happy-go-lucky family. And she loved helping, doing anything. So we were very close, and we left school together and decided we'd get a job. We didn't want to do A-levels. We had enough of boarding school, going to bed at 8:30. So we went to an industrial town, South Yorkshire, in the Inland Revenue, and we went into lodgings. So this is the second book now, from 1957 to 64. And I loved motorbikes and dances, and I wanted to meet Mr. Wright. That was another of my dreams, by the way, meeting Mr. Wright, getting married and having a family. I certainly did that one.
Yeah, you did.
Yes, because in this book, I get transferred to Middlesbrough. And eventually she goes further south where her sisters live. We're still in touch. And she's married, and we still write letters at Christmas, and it's lovely. And she loves my books because she's in them. And I get to Middlesbrough and I don't know anybody, so I go to a dance hall and ask to sit near this young lady because I lodged with my auntie, but I didn't know any young people. And before the end of the evening, this young man came to ask me for a dance, and that was the man I married 63 years ago. So this is all in this book. Both sets of parents were a bit anxious. I was a Catholic, he wasn't, so they were both a bit concerned, but we were going to get married, and we got married. And we went down to Cheshire. He applied for a job down there because he loved aeroplanes, and he worked not on aeroplanes, but he used to watch them fly off every day when he was working. And we had 3 little ones, and I got homesick because when you find you're going to have a baby, you want to go and visit relatives and show your baby off. And I couldn't ring them, I could write. See, so it was very difficult. And also, I didn't tell Ray at first, but he came home one day and said, they're having to send some of us elsewhere to work, and I'm going to have to move to another part of the country. I don't want to be a weekend dad. And I said, well, I'd like to move up north. He said, right, I'll find a job up there. We'll go back up north. So that book ends with coming up on the train with these 3 little children back up to Thornaby and Stockton. And then the third book starts. We live 6 weeks with Ray's parents. They're very kind. They lived in a 2 up, 2 down with an outside toilet. And they had 2 bedrooms. So Ray and I were in a bed, the little boy in the cot, little girl a bit older in 2 chairs pushed together. Baby slept on the landing in the carry cot because they didn't have anywhere else to put him.
Yeah.
And we survived 6 weeks and found our own house in Stockton, where I made new friends over the back, the neighbours, and I'm still in touch with her as well. And we used to meet up and have a chat, 2 or 3 of us. And so that's that book, and it covers 5 years until we've had our 5th baby. And we find we've outgrown the house because we have nowhere room to put this fifth baby. The two girls are in the back room, the two little boys are in the box room, and I said, we'll have to move. So that book ends. We've just found a big, old, dilapidated, needs rewiring and heating house in Middlesbrough. But it was big and it had a lovely garden and it was much more private than living on a estate with your glass windows at the back and your glass windows at the front, you know, and I wanted more privacy, was what I was used to at home. So that book ends there, Travelling to Middlesbrough, and that's the latest one that I've had published.
And I believe you've got another one coming out later this year.
Sorry, I have. When I finished that one and we moved to Stockton, I asked Christopher's our sixth child. He said, where does it end, Mum? And I said, when we moved to Middlesbrough. He said, well, I'm not in it. I said, no. And neither are Jonathan or Elizabeth. I said, so I'll write one more. And I'll get you as well. So my next book, which I'm now writing, I've nearly finished it. I'm working very hard at it. I wanted it published before I was 85 in July. So I thought that's a good, you know, gives me more discipline because you have to sit and make yourself get on that computer and type.
Yeah.
And that'll cover from 90, Christopher was born a year after we moved. So 1969 to 1982. It was a very tough time, especially up north, early 70s, unemployment, power cuts, strikes. My husband was out of work a while. I won't tell you all the book. And then the late 70s, more problems, and he was out of work again. I won't spoil the book by telling you the end and everything. It does turn out all right. But we went there with high hopes. We took on a bigger mortgage because we'd just been taken on at ICI, and we thought he'd work for contract for them, and he got a permanent job on staff. I thought we made. His dad worked for ICI as a labourer all his life. His brother worked at ICI. And in those days, it was a job for life quite often.
Yeah.
And when in a year of moving to this bigger house and a bigger mortgage, the whole section was finished. So we were up here going full of life, and within a year, it was hard work again. So the story is how we came through all of that, and we did. And it finishes on a high again, but I won't tell you what it is.
They'll have to buy it. So obviously you've been through some challenges, Edna, and you stuck a book with us called Our Suicidal Teens at the Book Dragon. Can you share with our viewers the inspiration behind you writing that?
Yes, it was the first book I got published. And when I went off to do my degree, our youngest daughter, in my second year of my degree, our youngest daughter was 13. And she started to become a very difficult teenager. And we just thought, we've already had 7. We know about teenagers. She's just maybe a bit worse. But it was different. She didn't want to go to school. And she was a really clever girl. And she was passed many grades in cello and piano. She was very popular. And I didn't know what was wrong. And eventually, it was about February, I think, I took her to the doctors. And he thought it was premenstrual tension. And I'm thinking, I don't think it is. And I remember us both breaking down because we'd been under stress for weeks with how she was and sleepless nights and wanting to come and sleep with me. You know, there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And when we realized we were upset, he said, all right, well, you know, come back next week. And within 2 or 3 weeks, I thought, it's not that at all. And I rang him, and I shouldn't have done. I said, she wants me to take her away somewhere to get her better. I need help. But he'd already hinted in the surgery or the previous visit that he might have to contact someone else who knew more about these things. And that fear and stigma. And I said, are you talking about a psychiatrist? And he said, yes. And I didn't want to tell Elizabeth because it's a lot better now, but there was still stigma. But back then, it was very strong, and you just didn't talk about things like that. Anyway, within a week, I rang him again. I said she's really ill, and we got an emergency appointment with a consultant psychiatrist who stopped her schooling, a piano, a cello, homework, the lot. She said, your daughter's very ill. You bring her back in the morning, take her to school now, pick up her cello, cancel everything. And you're like shell-shocked.
Hmm.
So we did, and I went back next morning, and another and I had to leave her. And I didn't want to leave her, and she didn't want to leave. And they let me hang around for an hour or two, and then I had to leave. And the next day, and then another psychiatrist called me into his office, and he said, "You're Edna Hunneysett." I said, "His mother." I said, "I am." He said, "Your daughter's very ill." I said, "Well, I know she's ill." No, he said, "She's very ill." And he kept talking. I said, "Are you telling me she's suicidal?" He said, "Yes, I am." He said, you take her home because it'll do her more harm than good to stay here overnight, but don't you let her out of your sight."
Yeah.
And at the shock, and as I got to the door, I got called in by a nurse who said, "Don't hang around in the morning," she said. "It upsets some of the other patients when you're still here with your daughter." I remember crying all the way home. I went to my friend and we sat and drank coffee and smoked cigarettes. But I mean, the shock is intense, and I won't go into all the details, but she did recover, and then we had her at home. Nobody understood. She didn't
Yeah.
look, she didn't look ill at all. My husband struggled with it. He used to go for walks around the block. Uh, it turned our family upside down.
Yeah.
Children, it went on. They wanted her back in the August. She had stopped school. And this went on, and she did eventually recover, and she had a relapse at 16, another relapse at 19. And it was when she was recovering from that second relapse, that's when she read the book about my dad.
Hmm.
So in the meantime, I'd got my BA with a lot of struggle. And I thought, I'm going to do a master's degree because I want to research this topic, care. Because I turned to a priest, and they were lovely, and they're really good with sick people, and they visit them. And our parish priest, he was elderly and he was lovely. And I don't knock anybody for this because they don't understand, they don't know how to help. And he was frightened of coming because he said, "I don't deal with teenagers very well. I'm better with older people. I know nothing about mental illness. I'm frightened I'll do more harm than good." And I thought, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
And because my mum now manifested with an obsessive compulsive disorder and was on the phone every week, nearly sessions about touching things and cleanliness. I thought, well, somebody should do something about it. Well, maybe I better. So I did. I went back to my master's to do a dissertation on this. And one of my tutors, I had a running with him and ended up in tears because he said I was too emotionally involved and I wouldn't reach the standard. And I thought, don't you challenge me. I went to the other tutor and he reluctantly, but he was very nice, said yes, okay. And I got a distinction for it.
Wow, that's
No,
incredible.
it was. But and when I got the results, they said they hoped we would get it published in some form. And I thought, who wants to read a piece of work like that, research? I did big questionnaires across 3 different denominations. I did 2 carers groups. I'd started a carers group by then. There's too much to tell you. So I thought, I'll write my story and I'll add the dissertation in the second half. So I
Yeah.
started off by a phone call from my son saying my daughter was drunk at 13, come and get her. And she told us she was drinking. He'd bought her the wine for a party, he thought. He was 15. And we went out. I said next day, "Why did you drink?" She said, "Mum, I want to be happy. My brothers have a drink at Christmas and they're happy." And that's why I wrote that book. And, and it still annoys me today, Michelle, that last week the newscaster called someone a schizophrenic and they're not. They're a person with schizophrenia. We should not label people by their illness.
Yeah.
They're not a manic depressive. No, now we call it bipolar. They're not an illness. They're a person. Like,
Yeah.
to get through to my mother, she was a person. Mum, yes, because at first when I told her she had a mental illness, she was distraught. I said, "Mum, you're a person. You're lovable, you do things." I said, "You just have an illness. It happens to be called a mental illness, that's all." So that's why, and then I went around with the book and did lots of talks all over, but that's why that book's so important. And the good news is, Elizabeth's now a deputy head of a large primary school, and she's married and she has 5 children. We had a happy ending, but not everybody does. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
make sense.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing such a personal story with us, Edna. And I think that'll give hope to others, who find themselves in the same situation or who are trying to understand mental illness. And you can find copies of Edna's brilliant books and beautiful handmade dragons at the Book Dragon shop on West Road, Stockton-on-Tees, or on our website, thebookdragon.co.uk. And Edna's going to be at the Book Dragon in person this coming Saturday between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. So that'll be a wonderful opportunity to meet her in person and get her to sign some copies of your books. We hope to see you there. And thank you so much for joining us today, Edna. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me, Michelle, and all your people at the bookshop. You're quite great. Thank you.
Thank you.